That brings us to item F, which is a presentation on the process regarding the construction of a City of Staunton Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court facility. Ms. Beauregard.
I'm going to run the slides tonight. I don't think this item needs any introduction. This has been a very hot topic the last couple of weeks, but we're here tonight to share with the community. Oops. Get to the PowerPoint. Hold on just a minute.
There are a couple seats right up front if anyone's comfortable. Sorry, Leslie. Anyone's comfortable breaking through?
Yeah, if folks want to come in and take a seat, that'd be great. There's mics in the hallways, you just won't be able to see it. So, and I'll say this up front, this will be posted on a website that I'm going to show at the end of this presentation, but you can get to it through our homepage too. So, okay. So we have several staff who are going to speak tonight. We're going to let Mr. Blair, our city attorney, start with the legal considerations, and he's going to provide some history of that and some context behind this. I'm going to then walk through the timeline and history of actions to date. That's a long presentation because there have been a lot of things happening. And so I'm going to go through it quickly, and I'm losing my voice too. So excuse me if I start to sound a little raspy, but there's just a lot. The intent of that was to show all the activity that has actually been happening. Mr. Johnson, our Public Works Director, is going to then go through the assessment and evaluation of potential sites and buildings. And then we'll do some summarize the next steps at the end. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Blair, who's going to kick off with the legal considerations. I'm sorry. No, I got one. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Beauregard. Go ahead. Mr. Mayor, Council. Want to start this presentation talking about the legal process and how we are where we are today. So before you will see the picture of our current facility at 6 East Johnson Street. And that facility, just to give some of the audience members and individuals who may be watching, houses both the Staunton Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court, as well as the Augusta County Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. Also has the Augusta County General District Court. September the 13th of 2021, there were two what are called show causes issued pursuant to Virginia Code section 15.2-1643. One of these show causes related to the Augusta County Circuit Courthouse. The other show cause, and that was addressed solely to Augusta County. However, the other show cause was issued regarding the facility that was on the previous slide. And as stated, Staunton does house its Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court there with Augusta County in a combined facility. So, what is a show cause? Well, a show cause is pursuant to that statute, the court found that the facility itself at 6 East Johnson Street was out of repair. It could also, there are other aspects of that, but I think out of repair is one of the exact phrases, and that's probably the best way to describe it if you've been in the facility. In effect, what the show cause says is, city and county, please show cause to the court why this facility is not out of repair. Subsequent to receiving that show cause in December of 20 and during October and November of 2021, there were discussions with Augusta County about the possibility of the city taking ownership of both 6 East Johnson Street, as well as the Augusta County Circuit Courthouse. In December of 2021, there was a proposal before the council, and that proposal would have transferred both of those facilities as well as 3 other buildings in exchange for $1 and the city's support of legislation that would have allowed Augusta County to remove its court facilities to Verona. At that time, the city council in December of 2021 voted to table that proposal until November of 2022. Subsequent to that, the General Assembly enacted legislation which permitted Augusta County to conduct a referendum in November of 2022 as to whether it would move its courts to Verona or remain in Staunton. And I won't go through all the details of that, but there were 2 proposals developed by the county that were placed on the ballot for county voters in November of 2022. This was special legislation because the county had been, by what's called general law, prohibited from having a referendum for 10 years from the date of its last referendum. However, this special legislation allowed it to conduct that referendum years earlier than the 10-year time period. In February of 2022, we had the show cause issued for approximately 5 months at that time. After consulting with council, neither Augusta County nor the city of Staunton contested the fact that the facility at 6 East Johnson Street was not in adequate condition to conduct court proceedings. That court order then stated that the city itself would need to provide a space needs assessment, a schematic concept, a description and schedule of the work that it would provide, for a facility that it would provide for its court facilities for juvenile and domestic relations court. Now, I'd like to talk to you. There is another statute, Virginia Code Section 15.2-1638. And that code section states that cities and counties have to provide court facilities for their courts. So the city itself did not take possession of 6 East Johnson Street in December of 2021. City also did not contest the fact that the current facility was not adequate to continue to conduct juvenile and domestic relations court proceedings. 15.2-1638 also states that the city or county where the court is located has to own the facility. Now, Augusta County owns this current facility, but we are in effect operating a combined court. But Augusta County, which is the owner of that facility, will be moving out in November 1st of 2025 if their new courthouse is built on time. So the city itself is going to have to provide a juvenile and domestic relations court. That is pursuant to this Virginia Code Section 15.2-1638. So we go to the court order that was agreed to by the city and the Commonwealth of Virginia. And Ms. Beauregard's presentation will talk about the specific steps regarding the schematic concept, the description and schedule of work, and space needs assessment. You'll find that it was a pretty detailed process. After that court order was entered, we started to comply with it. There was back and forth with the state. November 8th of 2022, Augusta County formally voted to move all of its court facilities to Verona in its referendum. So that leaves the city knowing that come November 1st, 2025, it is likely Augusta County will be moving out of the Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court building. And again, the county owns that building. The city does not have an ownership interest. So after consultation with council, we get to the March 31st, 2023 court order that was presented, and the court has now signed that order. That order establishes a timeline based on the November 1st, 2025 anticipated move-out date of Augusta County, so that the city of Staunton will have a facility to have the Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. As the slide states, it has a schedule for schematic drawings. They're going to be due July 15th of this year. Final design development drawings, and then final construction drawings, which will be due in January of 2024. It also has an actual construction date beginning April 18th of 2024. If you do the timeline, that's about 18 and a half months to build a facility before the November 1st, 2025 deadline. The order itself does obligate the city to provide a court facility. And it is true. I know I've heard individuals and received emails that effectively, if we can go back, Virginia Code Section 15.2-1643 says the court can't require the city to build a new facility or replacement facility. And while that's true, 15.2-1638 is a different requirement, which does require us to provide a juvenile and domestic relations court. It also requires that we own that building. So the court order in effect says we will provide a new facility for juvenile and domestic relations court by November 1st of 2025. I know, again, I've received inquiries about the order itself. If you read the order itself, while that requirement is there, it does give the city abilities to ask for extensions of timelines that the court may grant. It also, I think it is worth pointing out, I've been dealing with the Commonwealth of Virginia, and to let the citizens know, the Attorney General's office actually represents the judges in this matter. The judges don't represent themselves. The Attorney General's office has hired an individual named Ford Stevens who works at a Richmond law firm to represent it. Mr. Johnston and myself have been working with Mr. Stevens the entire time to try to work out this schedule and this plan so that there will be a juvenile court facility by November 1st of 2025. Mr. Stevens has been nothing but accommodating. While we have had back and forths and some arguments over our schematics and some of the details of the schedule of work, he has been very reasonable. Again, he is focused as much on the November 1st date as we are. However, it is, as I stated, he is also very reasonable. I do not believe that if there's an effort to ask for an amendment to the court order, that there's going, it's as long as it's a rational, reasonable idea of how to get that court in place. In our dealings with Mr. Stevens, he's been nothing but accommodating, and I believe that's a possibility if that is ultimately the desire here. I do, though, want one last thing I want to state about the March 31st, 2023 court order is that it does list what we call the Hardy lot as the potential site. If you take a look at the court file, we were really, per that February 2022 order, we needed to have something in by about mid-December, depending on how you calculate the dates, as to providing where the court was going to locate. There were extensions that Mr. Stevens agreed to I believe December of 2022, January and February of 2023. That again gave us time. Ms. Beauregard and Mr. Johnston will go through some of the details of what occurred during those months. But we needed to have something presented by March 31st, 2023 in terms of a site and a schedule. And the council, after consultation, I think it's fair to describe it as reluctantly said the Hardy lot would be where we would locate. However, as stated, and I know we will go over this, that is not, while it's a court order, I do believe that Mr. Stevens, if there is some alternative site, some sort of, and again, it has to be a realistic alternative presented. I don't see any reason why he would object to that. One last thing I should say that I want to go over that I've heard concerns about is the guidelines for court facilities. And what are they? They are established ultimately by the Virginia judiciary. And the question I hear the most is, well, are they guidelines? Are they regulations? Are they standards? They're guidelines. Guidelines mean the following. They mean this is what the court system believes would make an adequate juvenile and domestic relations court. And here are the guidelines we would like you to follow. However, it is worth pointing out, and guidelines, again, there is some malleability concerning, let's say, if the guidelines themselves called for a certain square footage of storage space. And we had an existing site that instead of the Hardy lot, or that wasn't our plan. If we had said we were going to acquire a site and that site only had, say, 1,400 square feet of storage, the guidelines required 1,600 square feet. There's malleability there, but what has been communicated to us, Mr. Johnston and myself, and it's not just from Mr. Stevens, but it's been by architects who've worked with the state on other courthouse projects, is that accessibility, which is required by the Americans with Disabilities Act, security and circulation, those guidelines, that's where the state draws its line in the sand. Accessibility, security, and circulation. But again, when we talk about guidelines and the malleability in those guidelines, things such as the size of a conference room, the size of a witness room, perhaps the size of a courtroom, depending on what kind of footage we're talking about and if it doesn't affect security, those are things that are malleable and we can agree upon to perhaps deviate from the guidelines. They are not set in stone. However, it has been communicated to us and through talking with architects who've worked with the state on other courthouse projects, security, accessibility, and circulation of personnel in the facilities, that's where the state draws its line when it comes to the guidelines. And with that, I will turn it back to Ms. Bowe.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. I'm going to start with the December 9th City Council meeting that Mr. Blair already spoke about. And this was the meeting where City Council had an MOU in front of them to acquire the 5 properties, including the court facilities and to support legislation to relocate the courts to Verona. That was tabled until November 2022. Then this timeline combines both city council meetings and then actions that the staff took between staff and the state. So it's long, so please bear with me, but it's important to see all of this because it shows the amount of effort that has been taken. And on January 11th, there was a special council meeting called to discuss that December decision that included a public comment period. And I'm sorry this is cut off, but what that says is no quorum was present and the meeting did not occur. 2 days later at the regular council meeting, during that meeting, there was a discussion about the J&DR court facility and a public hearing was held that evening. Then 5 days later, staff engaged Thompson and Litton to perform a space needs assessment at a cost of $7,300. And I'll go over the cost as what is spent to date at the end of my presentation. You'll see a total. On February 10th, City Council held a closed meeting to discuss the show cause. And then on February 15th, Mr. Blair already spoke about this. There was a court order filed that provided a plan to correct non-compliance, including the space needs assessment, which had to be submitted by April 12th, 2022, followed by a schematic plan and a schedule. On March 28th, Thompson and Litton provided the space needs assessment to the Commonwealth that included 20-year projections. So it wasn't just looking for the immediate future, but for the far future, what the courthouse needed. And then on May 2nd, the Commonwealth submitted its first comment letter to the city, and we're calling that comment letter number 1. And you're going to see comment letter number 1, 2, 3 as we go along. And this was in terms of the space needs assessment. On May 27th, Thompson and Litton submitted the revised space needs assessment to the city, responding to that same comment letter number 1. And then on June 3rd, Thompson and Litton provided the city additional information acknowledging that the site selection was required before all Commonwealth comments can be addressed, but we did not have a site at that time. On June 9th, City Council held a closed meeting to discuss the show cause and then also began to explore some downtown sites. After that meeting, staff began to explore those. On June 22nd, the city staff engaged with Thompson and Litton to perform an assessment for those sites at a cost of $4,700. And then on July 14th, Thompson and Litton submitted that same site assessment report on the 2 properties. And that report deemed each site unsuitable based on the space needs assessment. On July 22nd, with no site identified, Thompson and Litton submitted to the city a conceptual floor plan based on a generic, non-specific court site. So we have a floor plan now, but no site. On August 1st, the city submitted a revised space needs assessment to the Commonwealth, including the non-site floor plan. And this is submittal number 2. And then on August 3rd, the Commonwealth addressed items of non-compliance in the second submittal, including the need for a more detailed schematic plan and an accelerated development schedule, which is comment letter number 2. And the city was required to respond by December 1st, 2022, which is the date Mr. Blair had brought up previously as well during his comments. On August 16th, our city engineer and public works director did a technical review of the Augusta County Circuit Court and the district court buildings under the authority of the county. And they also deemed these sites unsuitable based on the space needs assessment. And then on August 25th, City Council held a closed meeting to discuss the show cause again and held a discussion regarding the downtown sites that I had mentioned previously. On September 16th, the city engaged with Thompson and Litton to provide a more detailed floor plan and speculative preliminary design for, again, a non-specific site. This was $9,500. On October 13th, there was actually an open meeting on this during the work session. The discussion was held to take a position on whether the city council would take a position on Augusta County's referendum to relocate its courts. The majority of council determined that the city would take no position on the referendum. So then on October 21st, 2022, Thompson and Litton submitted to the city a more detailed schematic plan in response to comment letter number 2 and an estimated site development schedule. And on October 31st, the city submitted the revised space needs assessment to the Commonwealth, which is submittal number 3. Mr. Blair mentioned earlier the Augusta County referendum, which occurred on November 8th, 2022, and county voters overwhelmingly elected to move the county court facilities to Verona. The next day, November 9th, the Commonwealth submitted a letter addressing, again, terms of non-compliance in submittal number 3, including the need to address minimum space needs determined in the assessment, security, circulation issues, which were mentioned earlier, the site layout and building appearance. And this is comment letter number 3. And the next day after that, City Council held a closed meeting post-referendum to discuss next steps. 5 days after that, the city issued a request for proposal for Realtor services with a submission deadline of December 9th, 2022. And then on November 29th, the city submitted Thompson and Litton's revised schematic plans for, again, a non-specific site with a cover letter in response to the Commonwealth's comment letter number 3, and this is submittal number 4. December 9th, the RFP deadline for the Realtor expires. We have no submissions for that. And then on December 21st, the Commonwealth submitted a letter addressing, again, terms of noncompliance and submittal number 4, including additional space needs and security concerns, and this is comment letter number 4. The city decided to go ahead and reissue the request for proposals for the Realtor services with a deadline of January 4th, 2023, and that was done on December 21st. Finally, on January 17th, 2023, the contract for Realtor services was awarded to Cottonwood Commercial LLC. 2 days after that, the city submitted Thompson and Litton's revised schematic plans for a non-specific site in response to the comment letter number 4, and this is submittal number 5. On the 31st of January, the city submitted to the Commonwealth a revised estimated site development schedule, and this is submittal number 6. And then at this time, no further comments were received from the Commonwealth. So 6 submittals, and Mr. Johnson's crossing his fingers over there. So between the months of January and February, the Realtor explored potential sites and engaged with city staff. And then on March 9th, City Council held a closed meeting to discuss the potential sites. On March 23rd, Council held another closed meeting to discuss potential sites. And on March 29th, City announced the intent to procure design services for a J&DR District Court facility on the Hardy lot and posted a request for proposal. And that's the time when the press release was released also. The information was made public. And then Mr. Blair spoke about the deadline of March 31st for the court order that also identified the Hardy lot. And then on April 5th, City Council had a special closed meeting to discuss the show cause and next steps, including reviewing additional sites. So this is just a summary of expenditures to date. I know there's been some questions about this. So to date, on everything you just heard, this adds up to about $22,000. So the $7,300 I mentioned earlier for the space needs assessment, the $4,700 for the site assessment on those 2 downtown properties the previous summer, and the $9,500 for a speculative preliminary design for a non-specific site. Now, proposed expenditures to date, and these have all been discussed as part of the budget process, is council appropriated $2.3 million from American Rescue Plan Act funds during this fiscal year to be dedicated or allocated towards the JDR court project. We didn't say that they would be for design or anything in particular, but it would just be applied to the project itself. And then for the fiscal year 24 budget, there is a $10 million bond issuance. The debt payment for that is budgeted in the 24 budget in anticipation that we will probably need to borrow some money to pay for this project. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Johnston, who's going to walk through the assessment and evaluation of potential sites and buildings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, everybody else. My involvement in this really started once the decision was made that the court was going to need to leave the building at 60 Johnson Street. And as Mr. Blair talked about, and as the city manager has outlined, initially that was just getting our hands around what is it that we need to build. Remember that we are running a joint court currently. So it's very difficult to ascertain what do they need, what do we need, what do we both need. It's not as easy as just looking at what we currently have and cutting and pasting that elsewhere. So through all the iterations back and forth with the Commonwealth, we finally landed on what we feel is an acceptable need document. And it has a lot of elements, certainly square footage. We need to have the square footage to create the facility that the Commonwealth has asked us to create and to some extent is going to require us to create. Acreage, if we're outside of the central business district, then that site needs to not only have a building, but the adequate parking with the adequate setbacks and all those site conditions as well. So that creates an acreage issue. Location is a concern. Obviously, from a public works standpoint, I would love for all city buildings to be relatively close to each other. Makes it easier for me and my staff to clean them, to maintain them. But the big issue on location was public transportation. We want to make sure that folks who need to get to this court facility can get there by public transportation. Accessibility, as Mr. Blair has mentioned, non-negotiable, as well it should be for all city facilities. Affordability is always an issue, and availability. And availability really is about time. As Mr. Blair has mentioned, that date of 1 November 2025 isn't moving. And every day it gets one day closer. So immediate availability of a site, the availability to get started was a concern as well. Now, we've been looking really about 10 sites. 2 of those are still being worked on. So we're not going to discuss those, but I will talk about some of the other ones we've looked at. Here they are in sort of an overview, and we'll sort of talk about them in clumps, starting with the West End and then sort of working our way towards the highway. So in the West End, there was a large site behind the food line on West Beverly. There's the former Unify factory out on Morris Mill Road, and the Chestnut Hill Shopping Center there at the intersection of Grubert and West Beverly. In the Gypsy Hill Park area, the Grace Christian School Complex downtown, the former Grand Piano Building right next door to us here. Like I said, we did get into the Augusta County Courts buildings, obviously the Hardy lot, and then out closer to the highway, a site next to the quarry off of Frontier Drive. So we'll kind of go through them. This is the first one. Again, 2 dimensions doesn't do this site justice. That's a big old hill behind Food Line. And if you ever find yourself behind the Food Line, you can see that lot that they're on is pretty much chiseled out of the rock. So the big issue with this, it's big enough, certainly, but it's the site development costs. There's not a lot of flat land there. There is a little bit of flat close to the top, but that would require snaking a road up there to get there. And I'm putting my public works director hat on. We have 2 water mains that transverse that site sort of diagonally across that need to be avoided. So this site was just too difficult, especially when, again, we talk about availability, to have this site ready by 1 November was an awfully big ask. There's also the issue of transportation. It does have a West Beverly address, and the bus does go by that address, but the actual facility would be the better part of a quarter mile up the hill, which is not ideal. However, our realtor still is talking with that owner of this, and they're waiting for a final decision. But this one is prohibitively difficult at this point. Here's the former Unified site out on Morris Mill Road. Again, it's a decent sized lot. It is encumbered with some buildings that are not exactly courtroom ready. But the biggest issue with that with our realtor is he's getting no cooperation from the current owner. And as I mentioned, we just don't have time to get into a long and drawn out back and forth over a site. There's also existing residents on that site. That complicates it a bit. So it's not too far from the existing bus route, but it is not on the current bus route. So now I gotta be honest. This was our first choice, right? This was when we sat down with our realtor. This is the first place we said, you gotta go get us this, right? Right on the bus route, nice big site, already flat. Buildings in not great shape. But we really wanted this one, but it's not for sale. And again, we just don't have the luxury to wait until it is. Grace Christian School, that's another place that's got an amazing location right there across from Gypsy Hill Park. Good access, bus access. It's a bit of a tight squeeze, but it's got some interesting buildings on it. The problem is Grace Christian won't be done with those buildings until 2025. So their starting line is our finish line. So this one sort of fails the availability test. That one panned out. The Grand Piano Building, right next door. Now we're going to start talking about some of those specific requirements that the Commonwealth had. So this building, as you can see, is hemmed in on 4 sides. It's got City Hall on one side, got the bookstore on the other, Beverly Street, and then the parking garage behind it. There's really no way to provide the secure parking, secure circulation, and accessibility required with nowhere to go outside of that building. It's at 13,800 square feet. It's a little small, right? The space needs assessment comes in a little bit closer to 20,000 square feet. So while I love the location right next, like I said, because if I had my druthers, all city buildings would be adjacent to one another. It's just not the right building. Let's talk about these 2 buildings. Same basic issue. There are existential problems with both these facilities that make them prohibitively difficult to accommodate a court of any size. Secure parking. Neither of them have adequate secure parking, nor do they have the footprint to provide it. Secure circulation. When we talk secure circulation, and I'm going to make it a little wonky here, but essentially, there are 3 populations that need to arrive separately and securely to a courtroom: the judge, the public, and anyone who is detained. They each need to enter through their own entrance. They need to travel on their own elevators, through their own hallways, and emerge into the courtroom. Paths never crossing. The Augusta County Circuit Court has 0 elevators and would need 3. The Augusta County District Court would need additional elevators, but would also need additional parking. Judges need to be able to park and walk securely into the building to get to their courtroom. And this is one of those areas where the Commonwealth, throughout all 5 of their responses to us, has always said, you have to toe the line on this. You have to meet these requirements. And it's those, as far as look, one of those buildings is gorgeous. The other one is red. But neither of them have what it takes to meet the requirements of any courtroom, whether it's ours, the county's, J&DR, circuit district, whatever. There's a Hardy parking lot. And I guess the big plus, a couple of big pluses here. Obviously, it's a few doors down from our existing judicial center. It gives the sheriff a fairly tight package to maintain. It's certainly close to existing city facilities. That helps me and my team a bit. It's on multiple bus routes. It's a decent size lot. Again, 29,000 square feet. A multi-story building, we would probably not need to encumber the entire lot, but we would have to put the right building on it. But the big issue here, as we were looking at, coming up on March 31st and having to present to the Commonwealth a plan, was that it was available. That we could tell the Commonwealth, this is our plan and it's a legitimate plan because we already own the property. And so it had availability that turns into schedule. And it was that schedule that allowed us to meet the demands of the court order. So that is what we like about the Hardy lot. Out here is an industrial parcel, sort of penned in between the mini storage, the quarry, and the auto salvage yard. You don't have to be Rodney Rhodes to know that is an industrial site, not a commercial site. And off the bus routes, a fair amount of site work to do. It's a relatively low spot with some drainage issues. Also, again, creates issues for the sheriff and myself to cover down on a faraway satellite campus out on the edge of town. But it is large. But it was, the accessibility wasn't great. The availability was a little sketchy, but more than anything else, it was the extensive site work that scared us off of this one.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to wrap up by talking about some next steps. Staff is continuing to review 12 potential locations. 2 of these were mentioned earlier that they were on the previous list and they're still under consideration. There are 10 new suggestions that staff have received. We're not telling you what these are, obviously, because doing so would definitely adversely affect the city's bargaining or negotiation. And again, going back to that affordability piece that Mr. Johnson brought up earlier, we are trying to keep this an affordable project that limits the effect on the cost to the city and to the taxpayer. So that is why we're not revealing what these other sites are yet. And I know this was mentioned earlier, but if an alternative location that meets the same timeline is identified, the city will approach the Commonwealth about it amending the March 31st, 2023 order. So it's not as much about the location as it is about the timeline at this point. Where the city is going to continue design, process the RFP for the Hardy lot. City Council and staff need this information. So we're going to continue that process. That's going to be important information for us to have. And then we're going to continue to look at developing the long-term financial strategy for the capital and especially the operating costs, which we spoke about in the budget presentation earlier, that we don't really have a firm grasp on what those operating costs will be yet. So we'll need to be working on that as well. Finally, this presentation will be posted here and we'll be posting information. If you go to just stantonva.us, it'll be right there. I think it'll be right there, but you can just type in courthouse to get to the direct site. We'll be keeping that updated as frequently as we can, starting with this presentation. So that is the end of staff's presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions the City Council has at this time.
Council members, any questions?
I did. Leslie, can you go back to that previous slide? Yeah, I understand that you're continuing with the design RFP process for the Hardy lot. In the event that the Hardy lot is not used, how can that be sort of transitioned to another property?
Let Mr. Johnson address
Yeah.
that.
That would honestly depend on what the alternate site is.
Right.
In terms of how similar it is to
Yeah.
the RFP, how, if it's close, if it's far, if it's, but more than likely the RFP would either have to be amended or a new RFP submitted based on what that new site looked like. That is an acquisition strategy conversation that we'd have with the business office and,
Mhm.
but no, again, we can receive proposals, we can analyze proposals. There's a lot of things we can do
Mhm.
that don't really commit us to anything, but allow us to keep moving forward. I'll be honest in that every day that ticks by that I'm not doing something to help with that November 1st date is a day wasted and a day I'll never get back. So we'll continue to do that. If we need to move on to an alternative, there are procedures for doing that. The specifics will be very site specific.
Thank you.
Questions?
Maybe this question is for Mr. Blair. Are there any legal penalties that we might incur if we miss a deadline?
Well, let's talk about that. The deadlines themselves could be enforced through the court order if the Commonwealth so desired.
Mhm.
Saying that, again, there is language in there that talks about deadlines and agreeing to extend deadlines.
Mhm.
Again, concerning that, Mr. Stevens has been nothing but accommodating
Okay. Right.
when we've asked. Now, I do want to make it clear they have an interest. This will be a process that started in September of 2021. The state expects the city of Staunton to provide a juvenile court by November 1st of 2025. If you read the order, there is provisions in there that if we take good faith steps and commercially, due to commercial, I forget the exact verbiage, commercial reasons, meaning construction issues, site issues, it can be extended.
Mhm.
Now, I think even if it is extended, we're going to have to provide a temporary court. And when
right.
you talk about legal penalties, if we don't have a juvenile court facility to have juvenile court on November 1st, 2025, I think the state could file a contempt motion to say, well, the state would on behalf of the judges to say, we need a court to conduct juvenile court proceedings. So I don't, again, the court order is there.
Mhm.
Certainly it has a schedule, but it does provide the schedule can be extended. It also provides that if we run into issues once we start construction, it can be extended then. Or renovation. I do want to make that clear. I say
Yeah.
construction, it could be that we ultimately end up with an existing structure, depending on where we ultimately land. But we do have to have a juvenile court
Yeah.
on November
Yeah.
1st, 2025. And again, that's assuming that the county, their construction stays on schedule. That's their planned move out date from the facility at 6 East Johnson Street.
Thank you, Mr. Blair.
Hey, Steve,
Yes, sir.
Mark, I was just tagging along with Michelle, which she said, and so the public needs to know that, and what Jeff was saying, getting the RFP doesn't cost us anything to get it. And what's more important is that whether we use that Hardy lot or a different location, getting the RFP will at least give us a ballpark figure about what a court is going to at least run us.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's the good thing about the RFP is it at least gives us a ballpark figure of what we're looking at, and it's not costing us anything to do it.
Councilor Robertson, the RFP is for design services. So those proposals will give us an idea of what the design would cost.
Mhm.
The actual construction cost would obviously be a function of the design as it is completed.
Mhm.
But it
Okay.
would certainly give us insights into the process to a degree we currently don't have.
Exactly. Thank you.
I'd also like to mention that, we have been having meetings and this hasn't been an ignored issue by any matter of means. But the reason we have them in closed sessions is because personnel matters and real estate procurement is to be done in a closed session. And the very good reason sits less than a block away from us. The Atlantic Union Bank was assessed at $3.5 to $4 million several years ago. When Augusta County attempted to purchase it for their court, the price was in excess of $8 million. Eventually, that's what threw Augusta County's hands up and they said, we can't deal with the city. So therefore, we go into a closed meeting and council is dependent upon city staff to go out and investigate some of this stuff. And I know I've been reading the letters. We've received many letters on our laptop this week. And everyone assumes that we're going to have a task force that's going to walk up and down Beverly Street saying, got any good spots? And unfortunately, we're just not in a position to do that. we will have to continue to do real estate procurement from a closed meeting status. And we're dependent upon staff, and you can see they have had numerous correspondence back and forth. And it's really not us walking up and down the street with a clipboard. So please don't think we're not attentive to the needs of the city. But this whole situation requires a closed meeting status. Any other comments?
I'd just like to say that I don't think one council person on this dais wants to use the Hardy lot. I mean,
Correct.
It's just, we had to put something in to satisfy the March 31st date. And I personally, I've been driving around town looking at places, seeing if I see a piece of property that would even look like it'd be close to something we could use. And I really personally do not want to see it downtown, as I don't think any of us do, or at the Hardy lot, I should say.
Correct.
I would call the Hardy lot a placeholder in my mind, at least. It is way down my list on that. Ideally, as we've talked about, a renovation of an existing building downtown in the core that could be used. If we find one that is workable in that, the Hardy lot is a absolute, to me, last ditch potential. And I think all of us are in agreement on that.
Amen.
Yes.
So maybe it's not quite as you all see it, but
Well,
we have
had to
been
tell
working the
something.
issue.
Well, we do have to have something, and I really appreciate staff's efforts and energy into putting the time into looking for other places and listening to some suggestions from the community. And it's my hope that we can find something else. And I trust that the staff has the community's best interest at heart, and that something appropriate can be found.
I agree. And then we've run them ragged all over town.
Yes, no, everyone
around
here on this
Continue
dais
to.
has come
With-
up with a suggestion.
Third parties chasing real estates, it's just throwing them out there and yeah, they're chasing their own tails on this.
Anything further from members?
Yeah. Thanks, staff, for everything that we put them through. I will admit that.
Any further comments from members of council? That's going to wrap up our item F, presentation of the process regarding the construction. Thank you, staff.